Let me try again.
So now you're recording.
Let's see, share. Oh, okay. I think I see what the problem is.
Okay.
Does that work now?
That's working. Yes, that's perfect.
Okay, great.
Okay, so you're not making me the host, right? You're gonna be the host.
Right. Yep. Oh, but for some reason, I can't see the, wait a minute, I guess I don't need to record this, do I?
You're already
want-
recording.
Yeah, do you want it recorded?
Yeah, it would be nice if you could. Yes, it would be good. But you're already recording
Okay.
because
Yeah, that way. Yeah, that way the people that don't attend can still receive the recording if you want.
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
But for some reason, I can't see the the PowerPoint.
You can't see the PowerPoint?
Can't see the PowerPoint? No. Sharing a window. I'm gonna stop sharing and try it again.
Yes, okay.
Okay. Can you see that now?
I can see the PowerPoint. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay,
I mean,
perfect.
I think I can just. So I imagine on a Saturday, there might not be, there's a lot of competition because people have all kinds of other things to do, huh?
Yes, yes. But a lot of people said they were going to participate, so let's see.
Okay. And have people started traveling yet?
Yeah, because this morning, I saw a lot of, I saw a lot of tourists on the street.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you live right in Paramaribo?
Yeah, I live in Paramaribo. Yes. Mm-hmm. I live in Paramaribo. Mm-hmm.
A little bit. You don't live right in the center. You live outside a little bit, right?
Yeah, I live a little bit on the northern part of the city.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's so beautiful to walk around. I mean, the architecture, all the,
Mm-hmm.
still has a lot of the wooden building. I mean, it's very pretty.
Really quiet also.
Mm-hmm. And what's great too is the cuisine is so diverse.
Yeah, we have a lot of different types of foods here. Different people with different cultural background, and everyone has their own dish.
Exactly. Yeah, no, it's very rich that way. And it seems that the fish is also very plentiful.
Yes, because you get a lot of people here from, I think they're Taiwanese or Koreans, and they, they to participate. Mm-hmm. And I mean, and they do they fish. Yes. Mm. Mm. This is Miss Anna Jagan. She's from the Ministry of Finance.
Good morning, Ms. Jogan. How are you today?
Good.
You just give it a couple of more minutes to see, maybe 10 more minutes.
Okay.
Okay. I'll put my my mic on mute, okay?
Okay. So Maverick, tell me when you want to start.
Let's give it like 5 minutes, Mr. Anna Bruce.
Okay. So I guess while we're waiting to officially start, do any of you have any questions to begin with? Or anything that you're especially interested in on the subject of anti-corruption?
Mr. Bruce, I would like to ask, from which country are you?
Okay, yes, I'm from the United States.
Okay.
I live in Washington, DC. I'm in private practice. But in my career, I've also worked in Europe. I worked for a year in Sweden, and another year in Brussels. And I worked for a while in West Africa. And I taught for a year at the University of the West Indies in Barbados.
Yes. Okay.
And I visited Paramaribo in 2014.
2014, that's 7 years ago. Yes, 8 years ago.
Yes, yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. That you
And
visit the
unfortunately, I was only, I only visited two days, and the whole time I was in Paramaribo.
Oh, so you didn't really visit the nice places of Suriname, because we have a very nice interior in Suriname.
I know. I've seen many videos of your interior, and it is spectacular.
Okay, and you are not planning to come yet here in Suriname again for the second time?
Um, I'm looking for an opportunity.
Okay. Okay.
I would love to visit. I was
Okay.
just telling Mavrick how interesting the food is in Suriname. It's so
Okay,
diverse.
Yeah, but I guess you only eat the fruit, the food that they are cooking in Paramaribo. But in all districts, all states of Suriname, you have other food. So if you went to the interior, there they have other food. In Paramaribo, they have also other food. So I think you just taste the food of Paramaribo, not of the other states. We have a lot of different food here.
Yeah, that's what I understand. You're fortunate that way.
Yes.
So, I think we can stop. Okay, Bruce?
Okay. Yes. Okay. So, so this will be a workshop on integrity during crisis, anti-corruption issues. And just to give you a short background on myself, I'm originally from Northern California. I went to school in the US, and after working a couple of years as for a United States court and also as a state prosecutor, I worked for 2 years with a Nordic law firm in Sweden and in Brussels. Some of my work was for a West African customs union. Then I returned to the US. I worked in San Francisco for a law firm. I then taught for 1 year at the University of the West Indies law faculty in Barbados. And then I came to Washington, D.C. in 1978, and I've been here ever since. A lot of my work is for governments and international organizations. And I visited Suriname only once in 2014 when I gave a talk on international tax cooperation. So this is what I want to cover today. So I will first, and by the way, please feel free to ask questions or make comments as we go along. And I also want to thank Mavrick Boejoekoe for all of his help in organizing the workshop and planning it. So what I want to cover are 3 areas. One is an overview about the impact of corruption on development. Then I want to look at the different tools to combat corruption. And including, I want to give you some examples of successes where countries have been able to attack corruption. And then thirdly, I want to turn and talk about how countries can build their capacity, their anti-corruption capacity. So let's talk about how corruption inhibits development. I mean, it obviously drives up the cost of goods and services because, you know, when you always have to pay bribes, it's going to make, you know, the overall cost of whatever you're buying, whether it's goods or services, it's got to take into consideration the cost of corruption. It also erodes the confidence and the trust of the people in the government. And it also, when it goes on for a long period of time, it also impacts private business because then businesses start to emulate what the government's doing, and businesses also are asking for bribes. It also makes investors more hesitant to invest because they don't know what the rules are. When they see what the law is, but they know that the law is not followed unless you bribe people, it makes them not want to invest because they don't know the real cost of, you know, of their investment. We also see that corruption has been a major issue in many elections, not only in the Caribbean. I mean, I will illustrate some examples in the Caribbean, but it happens everywhere. I mean, corruption is one of the major issues right now in my own country, the United States. So, and, you know, as I said, it can distort national economic development. In contrast, transparency and good governance will reduce the ability of political elites and major domestic and foreign companies to make side deals during the bidding and planning processes. So the idea then is the more you have open government and good governance, that will reduce the incidence of corruption. So let me stop here. Any comments or questions? Okay, if not, let me then turn to some examples of adverse impact of corruption. So as all of you know, because you're right next to Guyana, you remember that corruption was a major issue in the Guyana elections of 2020, and it took many months before anyone would confirm the election. And there was some violence, and there was a lot of uncertainty after that election. And in the Caribbean, major governance issues, you know, continue to distort the development of civil society. So I remember I worked for the Belize government in the mid-'80s, and the first administration of Manuel Esquivel in 1989 fell mainly because there were allegations of corruption surrounding the issuance of applications for citizenship by investment to Chinese citizens. What happened was Belize had a citizenship by investment program, but people in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs started basically doing it themselves. So they saw an opportunity to make money, and so they started selling citizenship to especially Chinese citizens, and suddenly there were thousands of Chinese citizens in Belize, and as a result, the people voted out Esquivel in the 1989 election. Another example that many of you may be aware of is in 2002 in Trinidad, because of the bribery surrounding the construction of the 1.6 billion Piarco International Airport. There were prosecutions of 6 top public officials, including a millionaire businessman and 2 former government ministers, and a number of them were convicted. In 1992, in the Bahamas, Sir Lyndon Pindling lost national elections. A lot of that was due to corruption surrounding the use of the Bahamas as a transshipment point by Colombian narcotics cartel. And then in my country, in the United States, one of the biggest political scandals was called the Watergate. And that happened during the 1972 election of Richard Nixon. He won by a huge margin, but during the electoral campaign, some people from his election campaign broke into the Democratic National Headquarters. They were caught. It resulted in a 2 to 3 year investigation. They were starting to impeach Richard Nixon, and he eventually resigned in order not to be impeached. Even today, probably the biggest political issue in the United States has to do with our election just 2 years ago in 2020, where Mr. Biden won by a fairly large margin, but nevertheless, some Republicans, including the former President Donald Trump, tried to overturn the results of the 2020 election. And that still, and that then also resulted in efforts on January 6th to where people broke into the Capitol, even though the police tried to hold them back. They tried to disrupt the proceedings to certify the election. And as a result, there's still right now investigations, there's prosecutions of the people, but there's still a lot of uncertainty over the rules about the elections and whether elections can be fair. I've done a lot of work in the Middle East as a result of the Arab Spring, which resulted in protests and riots, which led to the overthrow of governments in Tunisia and Egypt, civil wars in Syria and Libya, and unrest in much of the region. So I have, for the American Bar Association, I've gone into 6 of those countries, and I've given trainings to prosecutors on how to investigate and how to prosecute corruption-based money laundering, and how prosecutors can try to recover assets that are in other countries. So let me stop right here. Let me pause and see if any of you have any questions on what I've covered so far, or do you have any comments on what I've covered so far? Does any of this seem relevant to your situation in Suriname or in the Caribbean generally?
I think I would like to make a remark. So, for example, in Suriname, I don't think
Good.
I don't think in Suriname there are a couple of situations that are kind of interesting here in Suriname. I don't think we have a good corruption law, and on the one hand, and that's the legal part of it. But at the other part is I don't really think the country there's enough awareness regarding what corruption, what corruption is, and how corruption can impact the development of a country or of a region. Because, for example, now the country is in a socio-economic crisis, right? So I think my question
Right.
would be, how could corruption, how can corruption stagnate the development of a country? Mhm. Can you give me
Sure.
some
Well,
concrete?
I mean, one thing, yeah. So, I mean, one thing that it does is I mean, Suriname, for instance, has a lot of natural resources. And so not having good transparency and not having good anti-corruption means that in some cases, the decision-making of your government in terms of whether to allow the extraction of natural resources is going to be impacted by, by side deals, by bribes, or by giving deals to cronies of the ministers or of the, decision makers. It also means that instead of your government obtaining the revenue that it should, that the government will not receive the proper revenue from the extraction of those natural resources. And it also means that the confidence that the people have in government is going to be lost. It's going to be eroded because there will be just a loss of confidence that the government is fair and that it has integrity. So these are all the reasons that it's important to have good transparency, good governance, and to have a proactive anti-corruption program. So let's then turn to what are some of the tools, what are some of the mechanisms that governments use in terms of tackling corruption. So one of them is having a good procurement program. So whenever the government is procuring services, including when the government is allowing businesses to go in and to mine or to do logging or to do, to extract natural resources, which in Suriname happens in the Amazon and in the interior regions where the Maroons are. Unless there's good transparency on that process, there's going to be corruption. There's going to be laundering of the proceeds of corruption. And so there has to be a proper institutional framework for natural resource extraction. And I have read that, for instance, Suriname is trying to become a member of the Extractive Industries Initiative so that Suriname will abide by international standards with respect to extractive industries. So, so another issue is gold mining, artisanal gold mining in related industries in the Amazon. They also contribute to a boom in the informal sector. So the problem with having a large informal sector, so for instance, in Suriname, a lot of your artisanal miners are Brazilians. And the problem with the informal sector is that the bulk of the money in the sector doesn't pass through the formal banking system. And so the government doesn't collect taxes, and you lose revenue and all kinds of other other illegal activities like sex trafficking and human trafficking happen in those informal communities. So let me pause here. Any questions or comments on that so far?
Yes, sige
somebody,
Tahir, I had my hand raised, but I assume you didn't see it. No, because you just mentioned, sir, that Suriname is trying to be part of the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, but we already are implementing this initiative in Suriname. We have in 2016 or 15, I think we were part of it, and we have already been reporting since 2016. We have 2 reports already submitted, and now we are in the phase of having the reports of 2018, 2019, and 2020 to submit to the AITI Secretariat.
okay, so that's great. Thank you for the update. And that's, I mean, that's very good, because that initiative gives you a lot of feedback on how your efforts to comply with those standards are working. And that's very good to know. So another important tool is a national risk assessment. And I have read that Suriname has recently, I think, done a national risk assessment, or they're in the midst of doing it. And so doing a country national risk assessment on anti-money laundering is very important, because that will then tell not only the government, but also it helps the private sector, the banks, the pension funds, the insurance companies, the security broker dealers. They will use the country national risk assessment to ascertain what their own risks are. And in that way, the Financial Action Task Force standards say that that each business and the government itself conducts anti-money laundering due diligence on a risk-based basis. So once you know the risks, whether they are from narcotics or whether they're from, let's say, the extractive industries, or some countries it might be migration, human trafficking. Once you see what your major risks are, then your country can adjust in the privates. And when the government, when the central bank or the Financial Services Commission does its own regulation and does its audits of the regulated community, they focus on whether the private sector is taking into account the national risk assessment in doing their own due diligence. So what about some of the successes that countries have had in tackling corruption? So one of the successes is in your neighbor, Brazil. In 2014, a prosecutor in one state found money laundering and started investigations and prosecutions. And it led to, in 5 years, it led to 160 arrests, 184 plea bargain agreements, 159 convictions, and the recovery of over $1 billion. Some of the prosecutions were of one big company called Odebrecht. Odebrecht was a large construction company, and it was doing not all, but a large part of the infrastructure projects throughout the region and throughout Lusophone Africa. And so once Brazil started prosecuting, that has led to prosecutions in Colombia, Ecuador, Panama, Peru, throughout the region. And so it was also very important because the United States has started doing joint prosecutions with Brazil. And so and then Brazil also did a mutual agreement to share evidence with all the countries in the Americas. And so that has helped the other countries in the Americas prosecute their own instances of corruption, especially the ones arising from infrastructure that was done by this big construction company, Odebrecht. So Angola is another example of a country that has had significant success. Angola, as you all know, went through first its war against Portugal, and then it had a civil war. And once the civil war ended, it led to the administration of Jose Eduardo dos Santos, who was in office from 1979 to 2017. And then he was replaced by his handpicked successor, João Lorenzo. And when Lorenzo took office, he gave a speech and he said, look, the biggest problem we have in Angola is corruption. And I know where a lot of the money is, or I know who has been embezzling money from our country. And I'll give you a couple of months to put the money back. And if you don't put the money back, we're coming after you. And Angola was also under a lot of pressure from the World Bank, from other governments who said, look, we're not going to keep loaning you money unless you show us that you are going to do something about all the corruption that we know is happening. Shortly after Lorenzo took office, a big bank in Britain made a suspicious activity report about the son of the former president was trying to move a huge amount of money. And so the bank froze the money, and that caused Angola to start a criminal investigation. And they soon convicted the son of the former president, and he was sentenced to 5 years for fraud and embezzlement. Now, shortly thereafter, Angola has been going after the daughter of the former president. She was on the board of the largest oil company, Angola. She also had owned the largest telecommunications company, Unitel. And essentially what's been happening is Angola has investigated and prosecuted her, and Angola has asked countries like Portugal to help. And so Portugal has seized and frozen the assets in the telecom company that was doing business in Portugal. The Dutch also helped, and they have frozen the shares in the Portuguese oil company that the former first daughter Isabel dos Santos had. And so, essentially what's been happening is Angola has had a lot of success in prosecuting the two children of the former president, and they've had a lot of success in recovering the assets that were allegedly embezzled or stolen. So let me stop here and see if any of you have any questions or thoughts about the successes of going after corruption. Nope. Okay. So another important mechanism.
I have a question.
Okay. Sure.
My name is Orlando Olenberg. Can you give us some more an idea about the political situation in countries where they tackle corruption? What are the minimum political situations that there needs to be to tackle corruption? Because mostly corruption is tackled by, it's a political decision, if I'm right.
Yes, that's an excellent question, and it's a complex one. I mean, just right now, I'm reviewing a book. I don't know if you can see it. It's called Brazilian Politics on Trial, and it is all about the politics of how Brazil started doing its investigation. It was basically one prosecutor, but many people in Brazil, including the legislature and the Supreme Court, they thought it was a good thing, and they allowed it to happen for about 6 or 7 years. And then the new, when there were elections and Bolsonaro came into power, he basically fired the prosecutor, and and a lot of the progress that was made did not continue. And so, yes, you need the political environment. And so, that's not real easy. I mean, for instance, when you have an authoritarian government and you have one person who's in power for a long period of time, that was one of the cases with the Bahamas with Sir Lyndon Pindling. And I know, that has been the case in your country. But one of the questions is, how does a country change the political environment? So one of the ways is you have to develop civil society. You have to develop non-governmental organizations. So for instance, one of the most important anti-corruption non-governmental organizations is called Transparency International. And that was formed in 1993 by a guy named Peter Eigen. He worked in the World Bank, and he saw that year after year, the World Bank allowed bribes. The World Bank wasn't making bribes, but they were financing huge projects having to do with roads, dams, and each time somebody in the recipient was getting 5, 10%. And so when Peter Eigen and other people complained to the general counsel of the World Bank, he would say, don't use the C word. Don't talk about corruption because our clients are going to get angry. So finally, Peter Eigen said, I quit. I'm not gonna allow this anymore. And he formed Transparency International. Transparency International now has 100 chapters around the world. One of the things that Transparency International does each year, it has corruption perceptions. So it ranks all the countries in the world on a scale of 100 being very clean to 0 meaning very corrupt. And they go into detail about what types of corruption is happening in the country. Transparency International also lobbies the G20 and the G7 to make countries do more about anti-corruption, anti-money laundering. And so, so civil society is very important. And that's because a civil society organization will help educate your people, and they also lobby the politicians to enact legislation, to arrest people, to implement the law. And so, I mean, if I were in Suriname, one of my goals would be to establish a Transparency International chapter, because that is one way to do it. So in Washington, D.C., I'm a member of something called the Anti-Corruption Advocacy Network. It's not an organization, it's just an informal group of 450 individuals and organizations. We get together every other month and we talk about corruption problems throughout the world, including in our own country, the United States. And we talk about, you know, what each of us, what the different organizations are doing and how we can help the different organizations. Sometimes we invite people from other countries to talk about, okay, what are the corruption problems in their country and what, if anything, can we do to help them? So, so the political environment and the role of civil society is very important. Another organization that's based in Washington is called Global Financial Integrity. It's a think tank and it does all kinds of reports on corruption, including corruption in the United States. They've been doing all kinds of reports on the use of real estate in the United States to launder money for kleptocrats all around the world, including the Russian kleptocrats. And the Global Financial Integrity tries to partner with other groups to lobby Congress and to lobby the executive to do something about corruption in the United States. Another important non-governmental organization is called the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. It's basically a network of journalists throughout the world. And once every 3 or 4 months, they get leaked reports and they publish reports on corruption by high-level politicians. The last one they did was called the Pandora Papers. They also did the Panama Papers. They did the Swiss Papers. So they get, you know, once they get a hold of millions of documents that have been leaked from either law firms or trust companies, they will then get journalists from all over the world to analyze these reports, and then they will put out long reports about how different politicians in various countries are participating in corruption or money laundering. And it's basically a way to show politicians and other, business people that although they think that what they're doing is secret and confidential, by getting a hold of these papers and publishing them, they show that they're no longer going to be secret. Maverick, I think you have your hand up.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I wanted to ask something. What if, so I have two questions. So now, for example, I'm working at the Ministry of Justice and Police, right? And
Yes.
and I see people taking bribes. How do I deal with
Okay.
that situation? And I don't do anything because this the situation in the country is not very so it's not very supportive for to kind of combat corruption. But I see people taking bribes. I work at the Ministry of Justice and Police, or maybe at the Ministry of Finance. How do I deal with that? That's one question. My other question is, so let's say I'm an how do you deal with corruption if the political situation in the country doesn't support an it doesn't support an anti-corruption, or it doesn't support on a civil society. So for example, I know that a couple of, maybe 2-3 years ago, before the war in Ukraine, there were a lot of civil societies in Ukraine, but there was some tension between the civil society and the government because they were seen as foreign entities. So how do you deal with situations like that? I hope my question is clear.
Yes, no, it's very clear. So in terms of the so-called, small petty bribes, I mean, hopefully, if you see a bribe, you should be able to make a complaint to the police or to the prosecutor, and they should do something. If they don't do something, I would also consider whispering to the newspapers, whether it's Suriname newspaper or foreign newspapers, about what's going on, because it's very important for a country to have a proactive media, because in many cases, I mean, that's what happened in the Watergate that I mentioned in 1972, was somebody in the high up in the Department of Justice was so angry at what his administration was doing that he started having clandestine meetings with newspaper reporters, and he started leaking information, and then the newspapers started printing every day new revelations about the extent of the the wrongdoing, the bribes, and that put pressure on Congress to start investigating. So that was very important. I see Orlando Omberg has his hand up.
Yes.
But I guess a minute before you make your statement or ask your question, I'm not sure I answered the question from Maverick about lack of political support. And the lack of political support is difficult to overcome. I mean, and there's no easy answer. I mean, sometimes pressure from international organizations like the IMF, the World Bank. I mean, we'll say a lot of times the IMF or the World Bank will say, look, we see that there's a lot of rich people in your country that aren't paying tax. You're not making them pay tax. When we make these loans to you, we have to go into the market and borrow the money. So we're not loaning you any more money unless you do A, B, and C. And part of it may do with improving anti-corruption. So that's one way that political support can be garnered. But every society is different. So, there's no easy answer. And especially if you're a foreigner like I am, I mean, I can't say, this is the way that, you're going to solve the lack of political support in Suriname. I mean, you have to be politically savvy enough to start, organizing before you can, tackle that problem. I mean, that's basically what Barack Obama did when he left law school. He went into the inner city of Chicago, and he got involved in, organizing different neighborhoods. And then finally he said, look, in order to be successful, I have to do this on a national stage because, it's not enough doing it in Chicago. Orlando.
Okay, thank you. I thought you were talking about the city of Orlando. I have 2 to 3 questions. I
Okay.
wanted to zoom a little bit in what you said, that there are a lot of international organizations that started to. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, I can. Yes.
Yes. Okay. That there are a lot of international organizations that are helping now to tackle the problem of corruption, like the ECIG and others, like transparency. My question is, what is the effect? Can we get some measurements, some numbers on how effectively they are and what they are doing? And another question is, how important is the media in the tackling of corruption? How important is the media? And like you just said about the Watergate corruption, was that the media helped to really put fire under the case. And my third question is, aren't the international organizations like the World Bank, the IDB, and IMF, etc., are they doing enough to fight corruptions in country? Because they put pressure sometimes on country to reform their economy. But I'm asking me if they are really dealing with the corruption part, or they don't see themselves responsible for dealing with the corruption part.
Okay. So you've asked 3 questions. In terms of the effect of the anti-corruption efforts,
Yes.
I know there are some statistics. I can't, I don't have them at hand, but a number of non-governmental organizations have tried to measure the impact. And, it's partially successful. In terms of the media, I mean, I'd say the media is enormously important. I mean, that's why every autocratic leader wants to try to control the media. I mean, that's the first thing that Donald Trump tried to do was, he started kicking people out of covering the White House. I mean, you see that happening in Russia right now with Putin. the media is extremely important. I was once a whistleblower when I was young, and the politicians tried to, well, they fired a lot of people. I had already resigned. They sued me for defamation for, 800,000, another for 500,000. But I planned my whistleblowing with the only newspaper in this town of Boise, Idaho. And they supported me. And eventually the two politicians that I was after, they lost their election. And the other guy who was appointed, he had to resign because the media kept coming out with all kinds of investigative reporting that supplemented, what I had, put out. In terms of, so the media, I can't underscore enough how both domestic and international media is very important. In terms of the IMF and the World Bank, are they doing enough? I would say the glass is half full. They do a lot with the loans that they make whenever they find that there is collusion or there is misrepresentation or embezzlement or bribes. But a lot of people say they could be doing more, especially people say they could be giving more technical and financial assistance to help civil society in countries where there isn't a lot of civil society. I mean, they have started doing that the last 10 years, but people say they could be doing a lot more.
I think so too.
Yeah. So, okay. So, well, yeah. And so if I were in Suriname and the local media was not doing enough, then I would, and especially if there were some important things, I would contact some people like myself who could put you in, and I could put you in touch with foreign media that might be interested. Because even when foreign media, like the New York Times or Bloomberg News, those organizations, when they publish investigative reports, it's read all over the world. So the Egmont Group is very, well, let me just say a few words about capacity building. There's the Egmont Group is for financial intelligence units, and they have all kinds of important courses and working groups on strategic analysis, corporate vehicles, how to do anti-money laundering supervision. But even though they have over 165 members, and apparently Suriname is exploring membership, for whatever reason, Suriname is not a member yet. I mean, you can't be a member of the Egmont Group unless you meet their standards on both your law and your operations. So whatever Suriname does, I would try as soon as possible to become a member of the Egmont Group. That will really help your capacity building. So the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime, regional office for Central America and the Caribbean, they have programs including on corruption, illicit trafficking, money laundering. The Inter-American Development Bank provides grants to Caribbean countries to prepare national risk assessment, to revise laws and regulations, and to strengthen exam procedures. I was once a consultant for the Inter-American Development Bank to Jamaica. I helped the Jamaica Financial Services Commission improve its procedures and its regulations. The OAS right now is giving technical assistance to Suriname, mainly on anti-money laundering and apparently on helping Suriname with its national risk assessment on money laundering, which was, by the way, just presented last year. So the US government now, especially the US Agency for International Development, has all kinds of technical and financial assistance to help governments and to help civil society groups. So I would say, I would look to USAID to help both develop civil society in Suriname and to help the government. So they especially have an open government partnership where they try to make sure that the reports, that the financial reports and so forth are available to the public. They also have programs to strengthen the media and to try to combat governments that try to censor or pressure governments. The U.S. Office of the Treasury Office of Technical Assistance and Government Accountability Office gives help in terms of budget transparency, public procurement, and improving compliance with international standards. There's something called the Basel Institute on Governance, which is in Basel, Switzerland. They do training. They have a green corruption program where they target environmental degradation. One of their founders has written a book on gold trafficking and artisanal gold production. And he was a panelist for Global Americans on problems with artisanal gold mining in the Amazon. So the Basel Institute, I think, would be very interested in doing programs in Suriname. The Basel Institute also has an international center for asset recovery, which helps countries recover embezzled or stolen assets. And I know that's a problem with Suriname. So, I mean, if I were the Ministry of Finance, the central bank, or the Ministry of Justice, I would think about reaching out to the Basel Institute and their International Center for Asset Recovery. So also the American Bar Association, Rule of Law, has all kinds of anti-corruption programs. So I've gone to at least 6 countries for them. I've also put Mavrick in touch with the American Bar Rule of Law program. So, I think we're running out of time now. Mavrick, do you want me to just spend 2 minutes to talk about academic programs, or do we want to stop here?
Yes, Anna Bruce, we have until 1:30, so go ahead.
Okay.
Anna,
So,
but maybe there are questions from the participants. Miguel Abili,
yes.
Ms. Pocky.
Yeah, exactly. Or just comments, not necessarily questions, but
Miss-
comments. Don't hesitate
Comments. Ms. Jagan,
make
are there
comments.
issues that you're dealing with within your ministry or things that you would like to know more about? Miguel?
Can I come in?
Yes,
Um,
of course.
Yes, I wanted to ask because the information is, I think, very helpful on to know what kind of actions have been taken international to help fight corruption. I think at a later point, we really should look at how effective it is and the most effective methods to fight corruption at the national level, where to start. And one of the important things that you said is that the media, what I personally think is very important, can play a major role in all of that. What I wanted to know from you is also how do the civil society, because we've talked about that you need a political environment, but at the same time, the civil society can organize itself. Where do you start? What are maybe some of the best practices where civil society can start to work towards a different to work towards let's say clean governance, and secondly, corruption is, I think, something that's embedded into the culture. How do you change the culture? Where do you start? Do you start at school? So those two things I would want you to really pick on that, please.
Okay, so yeah, how to start, how civil society should start. They could start with informal meetings. So maybe there's only 5 of you that are interested in good governance. Well, you could meet, once a week or once a month or once every other month. And during that meeting, you talk about, what are the problems, what are the potential solutions, and you try to, organize, you try to recruit other members. Maybe, you try to, you talk about changing the culture. So you might also want to produce produce and distribute something about, the need for good governance. And you want to produce things at different levels, including, some for children that are in grammar school, some for people in high school, some for the general public. And, you might also want to try to influence elections. So you, 6 months before the election, when you're having, your monthly meeting, that's when you start planning, okay, this guy we know is taking bribes. We've got to get him out. And we have to, but how do you do that? We have to find a good candidate. We have to finance the candidate. So another thing that civil society can do is it can ask for help from anti-corruption groups in outside of Suriname, and you can ask them to provide some technical and maybe financial assistance. Maybe they can send a person for 3 months to help organize. So, but you're right, changing the culture is very important, and it takes generations, really. You don't change culture overnight. You've got to do it at all kinds of, at every level. And it's, it's a lot of work, and it's not going to happen without a lot of people spending time and resources. Orlando, I think you have some other
Yes,
more
exactly.
comments.
Yes. And one of the things I want you to emphasize on as government officials being in a position where you could say almost inherit a situation of corruption. How do you deal with it as government official? seeing that you want to do your work in a clean and nice way, how do you deal with that on the work floor? What do you do?
Well, I mean, first your country needs, I mean, most countries have what's called a whistleblowing law. Whistleblowing means if a government official sees a problem, he should be able to tell his superior. And if the superior refuses to do something, or he can't tell his superior because his superior is part of the corruption, then there should be a law that allows the person to complain to the whistleblower authority. And the whistleblower authority is supposed to investigate. And if the whistleblower authority finds that the complaint is supported by the facts, then the whistleblower authority can give a reward of up to 30% of the value of the corruption. I mean, that's what happens in a lot of countries, and even the G20 now has a whistleblower initiative where they're evaluating the G20 countries on whether they are properly implementing whistleblower laws. Another mechanism is called Inspector General. So each ministry should have an accountability person who on a regular basis inspects the books and can receive complaints. And if an official complains that, hey, I work, let's say, in the Ministry of Interior, or I work in the Environmental Protection Agency, and I see that the minister or the deputy minister or the permanent secretary is, is corrupt, then the Inspector General is supposed to investigate. And if the Inspector General agrees that there's corruption, then the Inspector General has the power to report to the prosecutor for prosecution. I mean, that's the way it should work, but many countries it doesn't work quite that way. Even in the Trump administration, what happened was Trump tried to fire, Trump did fire some of the inspector generals because he didn't want them to be able to make reports. Other countries have what's called an ombudsman instead of an inspector general. So, but every country that's democratic should have some independent authority that can receive and take action on complaints by government officials. When that doesn't work properly, what happens in many societies like the United States is that the official will then start talking to the media. And then the media starts, sometimes the person who complains to the media will try to do it in an anonymous way. So, and the reporter, if the reporter wants to keep getting the information, will make his report in a way that protects the civil servant who's making the complaint. So these are, ways that, you can try to overcome, problems that when you can't report officials that are doing something wrong. I mean, just to give you an example from my own life, I mean, I was just a couple of years out of law school. I was working in Idaho, and I saw, I was advising on land use, and the head of the planning commission said, "You can't tell me what to do, you punk." And he was so strong that I knew something was wrong. So I did my own investigation, and I determined that the commissioners and the planning commissioner was buying up land in secret names, in the names of companies. And then when it came to making decisions, they didn't reveal that they had a conflict of interest, and they were making decisions to benefit themselves. So eventually, about 2 weeks before the big election, I came out with a 20-page report. I got 15 out of 21 people, my colleagues, to sign it. And in my report, I mentioned all the conflicts of interest. I called for an investigation by the Attorney General. And I told one of the media people before I released the report that I was going to do it. And so even after the people that I targeted sued me for defamation, they eventually were voted out of office by a very narrow vote. They eventually dropped their suit because they couldn't prove that I had defamed them. And so, you know, I also told the people in the capital of Idaho, look, you've got to start participating in government. Otherwise, these crooks are going to, you know, ruin the development of your city. So, you know, that's, you know, an example of how, you know, when the government doesn't enable you to make complaints, you know, sometimes you have to be creative and involve the media in order to put pressure on corrupt politicians. And in those days, I couldn't go to the, you know, the international media because, you know, this was in the mid 70s, and, you know, I don't think the international media would have been interested in, you know, small town politics of Idaho. But you know, hopefully I've, you know, answered your question. So let me just take
Yes, you
a couple of
answered
minutes.
clearly.
Okay, so let me take a couple of minutes to talk about academic courses. So there's something called the International Anti-Corruption Academy in Austria. So that has various master's programs. It was started by the United Nations, by a combination of the United Nations, Interpol, the European Anti-Fraud Office, and the Austrian government. It started in 2010, and they have various master's program. They have one in anti-corruption studies, another in anti-corruption compliance and collective action, and another in anti-corruption and diplomacy. I've taught for the academy, and I now supervise theses. You know, the master's students have to write a thesis. So for instance, I introduced Mavrick to one of my former students who's an attorney in the Bahamas. He's now living in Washington, D.C., and he did his thesis on corruption in the Caribbean and these declaration laws that high-level officials have to do. Many law schools now have short courses on anti-corruption. So American University, Washington College of Law now has a a summer course on anti-corruption. They have, various, they have like 6 or 7 different courses on anti-corruption. So there are many possibilities in terms of, getting more learning on anti-corruption. It's a problem all over the world. And there's no, there's no easy solution. So let me stop here and see if you all have any more comments or questions on anything.
Thank you, Bruce. Does
you're
anyone
welcome,
have
Mavrick.
something? Does anyone have something to add or some short remark? Miguel, Miss Pafion, Miss Pocky.
Yes, if I may. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Miguel. I'm a little bit late in the meeting, and I think I've missed a lot. I just have a short question. I would just want to know if maybe the information that has been presented can be received, or is there another way to get the information? Because looking at the point of corruption, and I know that the presenter mentioned an international organization that Suriname isn't a member yet. I think the eighth. I think he talked about the eighth group. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I need more information.
Yeah, Egmont Group.
Egmont Group, yes. I think I need more information to discuss this also with the Minister of Justice and Police. I recently started at the ministry, almost 3 months, and I'm working at the staff of the minister. That's one of the reasons why I'm asking. Thank you.
Okay. No, you're very welcome. Yes, the slides will be available. I will send them to Mavrick, and this program is being recorded. So if I save the recording properly, that should be available as well. And also, I welcome you to send me an email to ask any questions about the Egmont Group, or anything else, any other thing. Like one group I didn't mention that I've introduced Mavrick to is there's something called the International Lawyers Project. And there's a group in the internet. The International Lawyers Project is a collection of lawyers around the world. I mean, they're from, everywhere from Europe to the US to Africa, and they help developing countries on anti-corruption and international tax problems. And so they have also expressed interest in helping Suriname with its anti-corruption. And so, that's another potential group that could help if desired.
Well, okay. If there are no more questions, no more remark, I would like to thank everyone for participating. I also would like to, as the advisor of the Youth Education and Leadership Foundation on Organization and Transition, one of our focus is leadership. And we've been doing different webinars on Suriname development issues, corruption, and good governance with Bruce. with a couple of leading experts in these different topics from since 2000 and I think 20, Bruce, right? And
Exactly. Mhm.
yes, and the reason why we're partnering with Global Americans and also the US Embassy to do these different webinars is because we believe that corruption is one of the enemies of development, especially when you're in a country that's dealing with a crisis. In December 2021, a webinar was hosted with the title A Region in Transition, Building Post-Pandemic Economy in the Caribbean with some of the top experts in the Caribbean. So we've been busy from 2000 and I think 20. I would like to say that this is a start because it's a very new topic. So it's a start, but we're not going to stop here. We've been talking to the International Lawyers Project, Bruce, and we're thinking of doing something. But we'll talk about that in another setting. Oh, I see, Mafro, Miss Poki has something to add. Miss Poki.
Thank you, Mr. Maverick. Yes, I have a question, if I may.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bruce, thank you very much for your presentation. It was very clear, but I have one question. You know, in Suriname, it is usually said that the civil servants of the government are not paid well. So in time of crisis, when you lead one of the largest service organization with almost 1,000 civil servants working at the department in a country that has less than 600,000 inhabitants. So to do a good service, you need money. But in time of crisis, priorities have to be set. So priority will not always be given to the department that do the population administration. So most time they said that officials are asking for money for the services. So you have corruption on the at the department. How do you deal with that in time of crisis when you know that the the servants of the civil servants are not paid well, and we know that our inhabitants, they don't like to wait long, so they are also ready to pay the servants, the working servants, to get their job well done very fast. How will you deal with such a department where where you are responsible for the service of all inhabitants? That's my question.
Yeah, that's a very tough problem. I mean, the only ways to deal with that is to pay your civil servants properly, and to improve, as you know, Mr. Orlando Omberg said, you have to also improve your culture to so that the civil servants will behave properly and not use bribes to increase their low salary. But it is, you know, it is a difficult problem if your civil servants or your judges or your prosecutors, if they're not being paid properly, it's hard for them to still do their jobs, you know, the way they should. And it does encourage people to, you know, pay them bribes in order to get the services that they need. So, but it's not an, you know, it's not an easy solution to just say, you should pay them more when the government doesn't have the money. It's a, it's a very difficult problem, and, there's no easy answer. So I'm sorry that I, can't give you an easy solution for that problem. But, every country has that issue, I guarantee you. Orlando,
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Bruce.
you're welcome.
Thank you. Let me start by thanking you for a very clear and helpful and informative session. I liked it that you really were clear on how to tackle corruption on the educational level, networking, working on the justice system, political systems, etc. One thing I wanted to ask you is that one of the areas that you talked about in the beginning that is being affected by corruption is private companies. And how can you get private companies involved in the fight of anti-corruption? Because you have companies that do that, but you have also good companies who oppose corruption. How can you get them involved in the fight against corruption? Then I'm talking about private companies.
So, I mean, increasingly, especially multinational enterprises, they have codes that they should abide by. So for instance, there's a new, it's called ESG, environmental, social, and what's the G for? I think environmental, social, and governance. They're supposed to meet those standards. There's also standards on supply chains so that they are supposed to meet the international standards that mean they can't use slave labor, or they can't use, children labor, to produce gold, diamonds, etc. And if they're not meeting those standards, then what happens is you can again get the media to report on them, or what is increasingly happening is that non-governmental organizations like the Environmental Investigative Agency will do reports showing that certain multinational enterprises are paying bribes in order to log improperly in areas where there are endangered species. And so, so that's one way. And another way is that if you have your civil society group in Suriname, your civil society can approach companies and say, look, we want you to be good citizens. We want you to be good stewards of our country. And we want you to abide by international standards in the way that you conduct yourself, because if you do, that will improve our country. And you can also say, and if you don't, we're going to start putting pressure on you, because when you don't, that's harming our country. That's, destroying our natural resources, or you're creating a culture of corruption when you use bribes to obtain permits to, whether it's extracting bauxite or timber or whatever, you can, so you can invite them to be, to have better code of conduct standards. And if they do, then you can, say, hey, this is, these companies are doing the right thing, And we only wish these other companies would join in having good standards to improve our country. So you can use a carrot and a stick, to get companies to do the right thing. And if those companies are part of an international group, then you can lobby the headquarters, or you can work through the media. So the media will say, okay, this oil company or this bauxite company that's headquartered in Canada or in New York, why aren't you abiding by international standards when you're doing business in Suriname? So, I mean, that's another way to, put pressure on them. So that's what I would do.
Thank you, Bruce.
You're
Thank you,
welcome.
Bruce. And thank you to all the participants. We're going to send out mails. We're going to send out an email with a PowerPoint presentation of the presentation that Bruce did, and also the recording. We're also going to have other activities with the university, so I'll keep you guys posted. And have a nice weekend, and we'll stay in touch. Thank you all.
Okay. Have a great
Thank
weekend.
you.
Thank you, everyone, for your attention. And don't hesitate to contact me if you have any questions.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank
Was
you very
very
much.
good.